Wanted to get back with you guys. This is our going to be our second podcast that we're hosting, and we're excited for our host today, or for our guest today, the two gentlemen from BW Fusion, Devin Baker and Bodie Kitchel, and Brandon Shreves is here with us as well. And what we're going to talk about today is early planted soybeans. And it's March 12th. It's 67, 68 degrees here in East Central Indiana. And I've myself on my farm have planted early soybeans in March twice, and never really had a downfall of doing it, and learned quite a bit from it. And what we want to talk about is just, getting guys thinking and trying and seeing if they can push their yields, get some of that workload off their plate, and what bonuses happen with these early planted soybeans, and maybe what negatives go along with them. So I don't know where you guys want to start off on that, but if we ask some questions and you guys kind of jump in and just go with it.
I've got a question. The two times that you planted beans in March, were they the best yield?
The first time I did it, they are still our farm's best yielding beans ever. The second time I did it, we did it in standing cereal rye, and I had the wrong closing wheels, and they were still 69 bushel beans, but I definitely learned a thing or two by doing it.
And you had a young agronomist convince you not to go in and replant them, so I could take some of the blame for that one.
We did both scenarios on it. Bodie was involved pretty heavily in the first time that we did it, and I genuinely thought that those soybeans were dead at Easter time, and I think we looked at them on Good Friday, and we looked at them the day before Good Friday. I sprayed them on Good Friday, and I called them the second coming of Christ, because they what we sprayed on them, the temperature warmed up, soil warmed up, and away they went. And the second time we did it here in 2024, they were really ugly in May, and Devin come down and basically told me to sit tight, and we did. Some of the concerns that I had showed up in with the yield monitor, but it was definitely my fault, and the closing wheels that I had on, and having the cereal rye there, and trying to manage residue. But I both beans were very respectable.
If I remember, I think I got a text with Devin's dad, Travis, on it that you referred to them as Jesus beans, I think is what you called them, because they had resurrected from what they looked like before. Yeah. It was impressive what it did. We clean tilled them. We planted them March 10th of, I believe it was 2021. We clean tilled the field and went in with 30-inch beans. We put a little potash and AMS on while we worked it in. And planted it about 140,000 drop in 30-inch rows, and I put them about 2 inches deep, and I think we ended up getting about not quite 80,000 stand count. I think the average was that. I remember that low swale back in the back there. I think there were spots that we were counting 58 to 65,000 in that heavy ground back there.
Yeah, and the thing that we learned from it, or that I learned from it, was how a bean, maybe a bean's, they tell you it's not a bushy bean or the plant structure of that bean, but when those things got spaced out and it got in that really good dirt, the way that plant structure changed was incredible. Quite frankly, I've never seen anything like it. The stem diameter was like a corn stalk, and the only two times I've been able to replicate that has been in March planted beans. I've never been able to do that in late April or May, and that's one of those things that was just really, really fascinating to me. And I wanted to kind of segue in, and we're gonna put in a disclaimer. Brandon had a procedure this morning, and he got anesthesia. So if he says anything vulgar or inappropriate, don't blame him. It's the drugs.
I appreciate that.
You bet, buddy.
Yeah.
So where do you guys want to start off with? What do you want to where you want to lead into this and get guys comfortable with maybe going out and putting 20, 50, 100 acres of soybeans in the ground this time of year?
Well, I think some of it is, kind of just we can kind of talk through the stigma of, why aren't more people doing it, right? What are maybe some things that you can do to ensure success if you do plant early? What are some things to look for, right? And what's actually happening, kind of the science behind the things that we're seeing visually. And I think a big one, at some point is to talk about a replant situation, right? When do we replant? When don't we replant soybeans? I'm a big on not replanting soybeans, just from previous experience. However, I think when you plant in March, you give yourself the opportunity to say, all right, it's the middle of May, it's late May, I don't have the stand. You still have that opportunity to plant beans middle to late May. They're not going to be as good, as the ones that came up and are thriving early. But I still think you give yourself a better chance than trying to plant May 15th, replant June 1st, June 10th, June 15th, July 1st, whatever that, date is to set yourself up for success. So I think, really just kind of talking, I think we could have a kind of a discussion of Rich, Bodie, we all kind of farm here, and, none of us would sit here and say, hey, we're going to go plant all of our acres here in the next 7 days. And so kind of why is that? But also why do these opportunities that they give us we get a day or 2 days, why should we, be going out there and seeing what's going on and just trying something, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that you touched on was coming back and replanting in May. And one of the things that I've been very interested to see, and I don't have an explanation for it, but we go in and we plant beans in March and they're 2 inches deep, and you're hoping for good ground conditions when you're doing it, and if Mother Nature gives you that, you try to take advantage of it. But planting beans 2 inches deep in March versus planting beans 3/4 of an inch to an inch in May, and it's funny, it's Mother's Day. You feel like you're behind the 8 ball. You push the envelope. Maybe the field's a little bit heavy. You can get crusting. You don't get a rain. It starts to get hot and dry there towards the latter part of May. And we've had more issues planting in unfavorable conditions in May and feeling like we needed to go replant than I have in March. And it's almost like you're maybe you're not completely closing that trench the way you want to. Maybe you're not getting the seed to soil contact that you want there in March, or maybe there's some residue issues. But you get an opportunity, and you're going to get those rains that get those beans out of the ground. Where in May, we've seen it time and time again on our farm and our neighbors' farms. You go out there in wet conditions, the weather pattern changes, and all of a sudden we got beans tucked in the ground. The ground's crusted over, and they're breaking their necks coming up.
I think part of that is I think every farmer would admit to it, is in March or early April, you're going to be very picky about the ground conditions. Why? Because it's earlier than what your normal planting window is. When you get to May and you see beans starting to come out of the ground, you see corn, your neighbor's corn, your corn starting to come out of the ground, that kind of all goes out the window, and we got to get this crop planted. And so the things that you went into the season planning, I'm going to do this, I'm going to plant at this depth, I'm going to do all these things. That kind of goes out the window, because now the thought is if I don't get it planted in this window, am I going to get it planted, right? And so I think that's probably as much as anything is we start shallowing up planting depth, and I'm sure we're going to touch on that and the impact of that. But we're willing to go into less than ideal conditions the later we get, and we're going to shallow that up, probably because the conditions aren't very great at 2 inches, that we don't want to see the bottom of our seed closers or our openers or our closing wheels at 2 inches. So we just kind of put it in. The top 3/4 of an inch is dry. Let's just roll and don't look behind.
I think you're 100% right. Dad and I have been talking about it all week and really all winter. There's kind of two things going on. Bodie and I have traveled the country, this winter, speaking at meetings, meeting with people time and time again. How are your crops? Oh, corn's phenomenal. Beans are junk. When'd you plant them? Oh, middle of May, end of May, beginning of May, right? When did you plant them last year? Oh, I planted them the same time, they were junk. And I was telling somebody at a meeting, I said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We're planting beans the same time. And a lot of times, I would argue that our conditions in March are probably equal to, a lot of times, what we're planting into in May. And sometimes when we start planting in May, that day or two window we had in March, I bet conditions were significantly, better then. But like you say, we just have the stigma of, oh, we have time. And I think the reality of it is we push the envelope way more times in May than what we would if we went and started dinking around in March. I'm not saying necessarily corn, but I think beans for sure, right? I'm willing to put those beans in March, take my chances a little bit. But a lot of times the conditions really aren't that much better in May when we get going. And then to your point, they get crusted in. Feels like every spring now you're just as fast as you can go, as hard as you can go, because there's a rain coming on Sunday or Monday, and you want to be done. You go, you get that inch of rain, just a goose drowner, absolutely pours, 85 degrees and doesn't rain for 2 weeks, and now, we're breaking necks and doing those things. So I think it's a lot of different factors, but man, it sure feels like in May we plan in a lot of marginal conditions that we could have been planting in March.
Our first episode we did, we had Craig Benedict here from Reynolds Farm Equipment, and we talked about planter and performance and prep. And one of the biggest things that to accomplish planting in March or that first week, 10 days in April, you got to be ready. And when your planter's ready and you're able to take advantage of the window Mother Nature gives you, it can pay huge dividends. Brandon and I talked, and I wanted him to touch base on this a little bit. What's it been? 2-3 years ago, you started planting earlier and earlier. You plant beans first, corn second.
Yeah.
And I feel I've gotten to the point, and we've planted early beans. We've planted April beans, 1st of April beans since 2009. 2012 was the exception. I was done planting beans, I think, April 25th. At that point in time, I had a job off the farm, and I had to get back to it. So I slammed beans in the ground. The rain turned off, and we would have been better planting the 20th of May than we were the 20th of April. But from 2009 to 2024, that's the only exception to the rule. Every year we start off in that. For us, we've hit 90, and we've had some years we've hit 80 bushel beans and 70. And by the time we started planting to the time that we ended planting, and you track that with the combine and the yield monitor, you can consistently see 15 to 20 bushel spreads depending on how wide that window of planting was. And in corn, we don't see that as much. A lot of it goes to maturity and when we're in pollination and so on and so forth. But letting ground conditions, soil temperatures, and things get right on corn pays dividends for us, whether we're planting in April or we're planting the last part of May. We've planted some June corn that was over 200 bushel. You just can't mimic that with soybeans, though.
No, I think the industry as a whole, BW Fusion, obviously who Bodie and I work for, every product it feels like we come out with for soybeans is imitating what we could do with early planted soybeans. I'll never forget the first year we rolled out, SoyWorks, right? Kind of an older product now. We rolled out SoyWorks. Bodie and I were riding around in the truck, went to Northwest Indiana, and just the way those beans came out of the ground in May, you would have swore, they were planted in March, right? But the industry as a whole is chasing, hey, how do we mimic early planted beans? Because they're different, right? They're different from the time they come out of the ground till you harvest them. Everything about those plants is different. And I think Bodie could speak to it, but it's what the industry's chasing. It's what we're trying to do. It's what we tried to do with BioBoost even. Obviously our new planter box for this year is to mimic what happens when we plant early. And so I think it's a good lead into that discussion of, what's happening when we plant early. Why do we see, we can read books, whatever. Everybody's like, hey, early planting beans pay, but why does it pay, right? It's not just, you're not just getting paid because the calendar says it's March 15th and you're planting soybeans, right? There's something physiologically happening within that plant to allow the grower, to allow you to be able to see those changes, to see those advancements.
Well, there's a lot of companies out there that's going to tell you it's summer solstice and it's sunlight capture. And we are BW Fusion dealers. We sell the product. Full disclosure, but we've gone to a lot of meetings, and I'd love to get him here and talk sometime. But I'm gonna bring up Greg McClure. I know him a little. You guys know him very well. You guys have talked, and I've heard the stories of Greg army crawling through soybeans, trying to identify the different ones from 200 bushel beans to 30 bushel beans, and why are they different? What can we, and I hope you guys touch on this, and this conversation could go 1,000 different ways, but the seed size that we see, and Greg's talked about cutting a pro box of soybeans in a third, and then planting them comparable to seed size, and then also turning around and taking that to yield, and it mimics, biggest bean, best yield, so on and so forth. So you guys kind of take it from there, but what do you think's driving this factor?
So I think there's a couple of things, but with what we've talked about so far, I want to make sure that, Devin, you farm, we all farm here, right? And so we can talk about it at a high level, and as you're listening to this, you're like, okay, well, it's simple. We're going to go plant all of our beans in March, and then pick up the phone and call any one of us and ask, well, did you plant your whole crop in March, right? And the answer is no, right? And the reason is that the one part of this that we have to still recognize as reality is crop insurance dates don't start until April 5th around here for soybeans.
Yep. Yep.
Now there's new programs out that you can buy a replant policy that gets you 12 extra days of planting. If you're wanting to put some serious acres in, I would say look at it. It's pretty cheap money in the grand scheme of things. I think I got a quote for $2.38 for $75 an acre worth of protection from a replant policy, and I get 12 days ahead of my insurance date, right? What we're talking about really is go out and be a student of your farms. Be a student of the crops that you're growing. Go plant 10 acres. Go plant 20 acres. When you planted that, I know the one farm, it was 20 acres that you planted, right?
Yep.
And hindsight's 20/20, right? If we knew what we knew today, we would have planted all 1,000 acres of beans that you were going to plant that year in that same window, right?
Yeah, I know. Same deal. I did 10 acres and went out there, and the very first time I ever did it, 2 inches of snow on them and cold, like frost 2 or 3 times on them. Never came out of the ground for like 4 weeks, and calling everybody like, did I screw up? Did I do wrong? And those were the first beans I ever made that went over 70 bushel beans.
And the thing about it is, and what's so frustrating is, both times I've done this in March, I did it. It got fit enough for one day. I did it that one day. The weather pattern changed. We got rain the following. So, some guys can put 300 acres a day in the ground now pretty easily. So, but you seem to get 1-2 days, if you're systematically tiled and you can get it drained, maybe your window's a little bit longer, but, in tough, tight clays, to get that ground dried out and get it to fit conditions, your window's relatively small to do this.
Which is probably for the better, because people like yourself would probably just hammer down and just plant all of it.
Get after it,
and it could be the right decision, but it could be a very wrong decision too. So I think it's important, as we talk about it here collectively, that we're going to get into kind of the how and the why. But it's also important, if you've never done it before, I think all of us would challenge you to do it on your farm, right? See what it looks like. Study the beans. Leave a strip where you can plant, when you would normally plant. Leave another strip where you would plant 15 days later, and plant the same variety, plant the same depth, and just watch those beans. Watch when they come up. Watch what they look like above ground physiologically, and then look at what they look like below ground, because I would bet you that your rooting structure isn't the same and your above ground isn't the same, just simply from planting dates, right? And so I think that's really where we probably go from here is kind of unpack the why. So you asked the question earlier, splitting soybeans. You heard Devin talk about a product called BioBoost. you really start to unpack why was a product created, right? So there's so many products in the industry that are built upon giving you the sex appeal, I'll call it, right? They give you that vegetative response. You can drive down at 55 mile an hour and you can see treated versus untreated. Maybe it's a bigger plant, maybe it's a better color, whatever it is. And I've heard it, right? I've seen it on Twitter for the past 5-6 years, right? Those are the ones that always get made fun of because they say, come back and post the results later, right? And you don't hear about it, right? And the question is if we saw a vegetative or a visual response early, why didn't we see the yield response to match what the visual response was early? And soybeans, there's two things that I think are extremely critical, and it really goes back to the same thing. One is the carbon content in your soils. If you don't have enough carbon, we talk about it as WEOC, water extracted organic carbon. If you don't have enough of that, it kind of doesn't matter how many foliar trips you want to make. It doesn't matter how many fungicide trips you make. If you don't have enough, you're going to struggle to hit 100 bushel beans. And everybody that raises soybeans, no matter where I go in the country, they all want to raise them. Right? Very few have. Everybody wants to, right? And there are people that have run your borons, your potassiums, pick any nutritional. They've made multiple passes, and the beans are maybe 3 to 5 bushel better, right? And the other side of it is it's carbon, but it's in a different form. And I think this is where the biggest response to early planted soybeans come is you're keeping a plant shorter. And when you keep a plant shorter, it is less vegetation that you have to support with sugar. So you get to ask yourself, right? When you think about soybeans, we all know that 5 foot or 6 foot soybeans are not anything we want, right? They're typically some of the worst beans that we plant. And they might look good, but they never yield good. Well, today, 60 to 75% of the flowers on a soybean plant are going to abort by themselves, right? 60, 75%.
That makes you sick to your stomach.
Yeah, so people say, oh, I got to do things to make them flower more. No, you don't. You're already losing. You got to figure out how to lose less flowers today.
I've said this, and Brandon's heard me say this. I've said it to multiple people. I don't know how many times I've been so excited July 4th weekend, and I think, oh, my God, I'm going to ring 100 bushel beans. I may have 120 because I'm out here doing my counts. And then you go back in September or into September, 1st of October, you cut those beans, and half your yield estimate that you had in July has been cut in half. And it's you've talked about this a lot, and we talk about how many units of N that soybean has to fixate. We talk about our nitrogen to sulfur ratio in that soybean, and everyone's talking about applying sulfur to soybeans now, have for multiple years. But that carbon piece you talk about, no one talks about that. And you guys have educated me over the years, and 95% of our yield is factored in your oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. And the other 5% is your micronutrients. So your standard soil test doesn't show you what your carbon levels are. And again, I said it earlier, this conversation can go 1,000 different ways, but how are you measuring carbon in your soil levels? What are you guys doing as a company to figure out where your WEOC is, and how are we going to improve it?
So 7 years ago, Jason Schley, who is the director of agronomy for BW, he's the owner of Next Level Ag Labs, developed the test that we're using today that we would talk about with Agronomy 365, right? 7 years ago, we both thought that it was just simply WEOC, right? We thought that the higher the WEOC levels, the better the soybean yields were. And we found that 75, 80% of the time that was true. But there was 25% of the time that didn't correlate. What we didn't factor in at that point was we weren't looking at the WEOC divided by CECs. And today, I think Devin would tell you that that's probably the first thing that he's looking at on a soil test is what are your CSAT levels, right? You'll hear us refer to it as CSAT. You'll hear us refer to it as carbon saturation, WEOC divided by CC. But you're basically going to take your WEOC, you're going to divide it by your CC, and it's going to give you a concentration of that carbon. And so you want 100 bushel beans, they need 5 pounds of N per bushel. It's 500 pounds of N. The CN ratio of bacteria is 5 to 1. So 500 times 5 is 2,500 pounds of carbon. What are you doing as a grower today to influence 2,500 pounds of carbon? Right? And the answer is probably not much because you didn't know about it.
Yep. If you guys could dig in maybe a little bit more, because you're talking about these soil tests.
These guys are highly intelligent, and as a whole, the company they've got some really, really good, and they've got their own podcast called Cropcast. Sean Nettleton puts it on, and you can get so far in the weeds with these guys that your head's spinning. And you know, remember us common folk who are just, you know, we're out here trying to grow a crop, hold a steering wheel tractor. So if we may stop and ask you some questions to kind of explain that a little bit more, because your guys is, and I think you're going to lead into the 365.
Yeah, that's where I was going with my question is.
And there's 75 metrics on that soil test, and it's
your old standard one has what, 13?
Yes,
12 to 14. Yeah, depending on if you get micros. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's a lot to digest.
So you're throwing out numbers of things of a lot of guys probably never even heard of. If you touch base on where you guys get these numbers and what you're and the matrix that you're talking about.
Yeah, as Bodie said, you know, we're utilizing the 365 soil test, which is comprised of a lot of the things that you're going to find on your standard soil test, plus utilizing the Haney extraction. And I was on a Zoom with some partners that we have in Canada today, and I said, your standard soil test...
Were they friendly?
Very.
That's good.
They like me, but...
That's good.
We don't talk about
politics, tariffs,
no.
Not shutting electricity off.
No, we don't get into that.
Stay in your lane. I like it.
I told him, I said, think about this as a recipe, right? Your standard soil test gives you all of your list of ingredients. Your Haney extraction gives you each one of your measurements, how much, whether it's a teaspoon, a cup, a half a cup, but that's all it gives you, right? It gives you your half a cup, it gives you your precise measurements. Your regular extraction just gives you your ingredients. But together, when you put the two of those together, and that's why I think the power of what 365 doing is so high, because when you put the ingredients with the measurements, now all of a sudden you have something, you know, that can serve your family. If I give Bodie a recipe, all he has is ingredients. I don't think he's a very good cook as is.
I'm burning the kitchen down.
But if I just give him a list of ingredients, it might not even be edible, right? But if I give him the exact measurements for those ingredients, now all of a sudden there's a story behind it. Now there's something to build upon. There's something to work towards. And that's why the combination of the two is really so powerful. And not to, you know, we could have a whole nother podcast just on 365. But in a nutshell, that's what it is, right? It's combining the ingredients of a standard soil test with your precise measurements of a Haney. And now all of a sudden you have a recipe. You have something you can cook, something that's actionable, and something we can do something with.
So that leads... and again, I understand how much time we could spend on this, but guys are looking for the planters on soybean planters have become more technology driven. You know, there's guys that's got some 2x0x0 on there. There's some guys that's got some in-furrow on there, and everyone's looking for, you know, what nutrition can I add to boost soybean yields. And I have been I was part of a group that I took away from it that base saturation of potassium was going to be my biggest driving factor in soybeans. And I went out and I had a 5-acre block in a field, and I took the spreader and we put 700 pounds of potash on to try to raise that base saturation. And we accomplished it. We actually from one soil test to the next went from I believe it was a 2.4 to a 6.2 in the base saturation on my soil sample. Now I realize soil moisture and a lot of things can affect that, but that's where we put 700, and then standard we put 200 pounds on. And when we come back and I believe you guys tissued it, we didn't get any more potassium into that soybean plant than what from 700 pounds to 200 pounds, and it's that eye-opening deal, and it goes back to, in July 4th, I thought I had 120 bushel beans. In September 20th, I cut 65 bushel beans. What happened? And the fertility from the planters to your end seasons, we can talk about stress mitigation through pod retention and plant health. But starting with the planter or ahead of that planter, guys are using AMS. They're using pelletized gypsum. Maybe they're using elemental sulfur. What do you guys want to see? And I understand you want to tie this to a soil sample and do it precise, but just for a generic, what nutrients do you guys think need to be there at planting time to really drive that yield and set that stage early for success on that soybean?
I think you got to stay away from potash early. That's a thing that everybody wants to apply, but it's the worst thing that you could apply.
Because of a salt load?
No, actually, because the higher that you push your potassium, the more you're going to suppress the calcium in the plant. And when you suppress calcium, you're going to create a auxin influence, and you're going to suppress the cytokines. So this goes back to that hormonal conversation. It really, we're going to take 45 turns, and we're probably going to get back to the same exact question, but I don't know when we're going to get where, right? But this is one of those detours to get back to that question.
This is life with Rich Mort.
Anybody that's going to listen to this that knows Rich knows that this is what to be expected. Yes. But it's the same thing with planting early, right? It's the same thing that we talked about, that most of the industry is focused on creating the sex appeal plant, right? So you're not alone in the fact that, potash is this nutrient. We don't have enough of it. We got to have more of it. So let's go apply it in the springtime, right? And we've seen it time and time again. So it's, when you think about nutrient relationships and nutrient ratios, the harder you push your K, the more you're going to suppress your calcium, right? You suppress your.
And I want to interrupt you here. The reason that you're against this is we're going to elongate that plant, and we're going to stack our nodes farther apart when we want, and we're taking energy into the vegetative stage.
Correct.
Instead of conserving it for the reproductive stage.
Correct. Yeah. So when we talk about auxin, think about auxin is growing up, vertical. Cytos is growing out, right? So if we can create a cytokine dominant plant, basically what you're going to do is you're going to influence the structure that Rich talked about that he saw with his March planted beans, right? When I planted in March, I had a bigger stem diameter. I had more laterals that were coming off of that. Why? Because the energy was going into mass more so than it was just going into height. And potassium, from a nutrient side of things, does the same thing from a hormonal relationship side of thing. And once you go auxin, you can't switch back. We know every plant is going to be auxin dominant at some point. But once you start that way, you don't get a flip back. So if you want to create a cytodominant plant, it has to start at the beginning.
Well, and then when it comes to, what nutrients, you were asking, what nutrients do you want to drive early? We're sitting here on a cattle farm, and Rich, when you have a baby calf, what's one of the very first things you're gonna give that calf? What's that calf want?
Colostrum.
It wants colostrum, right? What's colostrum? It's calcium, it's magnesium. Why? Because that's what builds strong bones. That calf's not coming out. A human's not coming out looking for a steak and a baked potato, right? That's later on in life. That's once they set their foundation. You get one chance to set that foundation, and you want to set it with things like calcium, magnesium, things that are going to build cell strength, things that are going to hormonally position that plant to then be able to capture the nutrients that we're going to push later that could be potassium, right? Could be sulfur, could be nitrogen, could be phosphorus. But we get asked all the time, what do you think about running traditional in-furrow on beans? And it almost makes you cringe a little bit, because you're like, if I was going to do anything, I would probably do the exact opposite or nothing, than put a 624-6 starter, in an in-furrow on soybeans, because I'm trying to push calcium and magnesium. When we're planting early, those beans are sitting 2 or 3 inches deep. What are they doing when they're sitting there, right? They're capturing that calcium, that magnesium. They're building strength, because that soybean plant's not going to be able to push through 2 inches of soil if it doesn't do those things. It knows that it has to push through that soil, so it's sitting there gaining energy, building energy, utilizing the nutrition around it to then hormonally have that response to set that foundation, to set that stem diameter, all those other things. You go out there and look at a corn plant at VT, you're not going to influence stalk diameter at VT, right?
No.
you're going to influence stalk diameter at emergence as soon as that plant starts to germ. It's no different with soybeans, but it's no different with what we're trying to push. It's about pushing the right things. It's not just about pushing something.
So and what you guys make fun of me for, I got a 2-part question here. In 2021, when I did 30-inch beans, late season, I had a tough time holding up my laterals and those laterals fell. They essentially cannibalized themselves, and it's tough. There was some beans in the pod, but they laid down on the ground, and I couldn't get them picked up. So I left yield in the field because of it. And the thing that guys, I think guys sit here, we are blessed with a great source of high calcium, low magnesium lime in East Central Indiana. And guys go and they spread a ton, maybe 2 ton of that lime on the field, and they think, how in the world could calcium be a limiting factor? And I want to touch base on that. The other thing that my second part of that question is we used 401, we used some BLG and amino, and I pushed back really hard on Devin's dad, Travis, about going to BioBoost. I had the opportunity to use it last year. I chose to stay my regular course and listen to you guys talk. And then when the first time I heard Greg McClure talk about BioBoost, he made me feel like I left something on the table. And there's some of those nutrients that a plant needs early on in BioBoost that's going to be right there, not in the furrow, but directly on the seed. So I touch base on the calcium, touch base on BioBoost, and I think I'm tying that together of why calcium is so important, crucial early on in the plant, and then what BioBoost can do for that plant as it gets going.
Yeah, so I think, it's what we've seen from, I don't know, Rich, 500,000 acres that we've got soil tests on, that what we thought we knew from an availability standpoint, we really didn't know. Yet we know there's 3 pools of fertility. There is an active pool, which is what your traditional soil tests are measuring today. There is a plant available pool, and then there's a total pool. And that total pool can range anywhere from, let's just look at phosphorus for an example, because it's smaller numbers, right? But your total phos pool could range anywhere from 450 pounds to 2,812 pounds in the top 0 to 6 inches of elemental phosphorus. Put that into perspective. I was in Nebraska 3 weeks ago, doing a meeting, and I looked at this soil sample, and I had 2,812 pounds of elemental phosphorus. And what that equated to was $4,980 worth of MAP in the top 6 inches that was not available. What was actually available was less than 1/1000th of a percent, right, in the available form. So how can we have calcium that, we've got a pH at 6.5, or we got a pH at 6.4 or 6.7, 6.8, whatever, and our base sats are 72, 73, 74%. How could we potentially have not enough plant available calcium? Is because chemistry reacts with chemistry. It always has, and it always will, right? And if you don't believe me, and you have liquid on your planter, go to your local retailer and ask them for 1034O and an unchelated zinc, and go ahead and put it in your starter, and you're going to make it about 10 feet before your planter plugs up, right? The reason that you run chelated nutrients with your 1034Os, with your 624-6s, your 318-18s, whatever it is because those are a cation and an anion. Your phosphorus is an anion, your zinc, your manganese, your iron, etc., is all a cation. And those complexes are happening in a tank. They're happening every day in your soils. It was what always baffled me, right? It was always baffled me. The first thing we did was you take a soil test in the fall. First thing you did was what? Get your pH right. pH is important. Yes, I agree. Get your pH right, okay? What followed that? Typically the MAP, DAP, and potash truck right behind it, right? We were creating our own complexes. And Devin, I'm going to steal it. Devin said this multiple times, and it is so true, is fertilizer plus time equals tie-up. The longer that you have those nutrients and inorganic chemistry forms out there, know that those complexes are happening, right? You've seen it. You've taken tissue tests. Your soil test says you've got enough nutrients. Your tissue says you don't got enough, right? Well, how could it happen? Because your soil test is looking at inorganic nutrients, but it's not telling you what is or is not plant available. It's just telling you it's here. We used an acid that the plants don't exude, that doesn't happen in nature, and that's what we've used as our soil test extraction acid, and we're giving you a number that says you have this much available. It's not actually what's plant available. So it don't matter whether it's calcium, whether it's potassium, whether it's magnesium, whether it's iron, aluminum. What we have seen is just because the total pool says you have enough, the available pool may be significantly less than that, and in some cases, there's more than that, right? And what that typically tells us, if you have more nutrients in the plant available form than what you do in the chemical form, you have a biologically driven soil. When you're half or lower, I know that you have a chemically driven soil.
I also think, too, through 365, calcium's a fascinating element to study, especially on a 365 soil test, because it's almost a totally different, not nutrient, but it almost reacts totally different than, let's say, phosphorus, for example, right? Bray phosphorus and phosphorus H3A, they react very similar. It's a very easy pool to facilitate phosphorus tied up, to release it. Very simple process, right? When we think of lime, we think of our calcium number. What's lime derived from, right? It's derived from rock. So now we're trying to break down. Obviously, it's a powder. It's a lighter form, but lime is not known to be extremely water soluble. So that's one of the reasons why we struggle so much with availability, is because when we just look at our chemical calcium number, we're looking at our soil amendments. We're looking at how good we are at applying lime, how good we are at keeping our pH in check, but that's not water-soluble calcium, right? It is at some point, but it takes time to break that down. And so calcium on the 365 soil test is fascinating, because you could have 2,000 part per million calcium and have a 300 or 400 part per million available calcium, actual Haney extraction. In our H3A calcium, that's our calcium plant food. Your chemical calcium offers very little value to that crop, where your H3A calcium is actually plant available calcium. Calcium it's just a fascinating element, because it's one of the very few that when you look at a soil test and you look at the chemical versus the available, it's almost a totally different nutrient. It reacts totally different, but it's because we've gotten to a 2,000 part per million calcium level by applying an extremely water insoluble product that's gotten us there. It's not because we have a ton of availability of calcium. It's because of how insoluble, lime and those kinds of things are.
You got pretty deep there pretty quick on some of the stuff that you said. And for some of the people that are listening to this, me maybe being included on some of it, feel free to contact these guys or us, and we'll get a little deeper and explain everything that he's talking about.
These soil tests are available for farms and through a platform of 365 and can be can definitely be done on your farm. But basically what you're tying up, or what the dummy me is going to say, that you've got three different forms of a nutrient on your field, and you've got an organic form, an inorganic form, and a soluble plant available form, and those numbers can fluctuate. Just because we make an application doesn't mean that it's going to get in the plant. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about that over applying of potash. It just because you put it there doesn't mean you're going to get it in the plant, and the plant's going to take benefit of it. The second part of my question was about BioBoost, and for guys that don't have in-furrow planters or in-furrow on their planters, and you launched this BioBoost product. And one of my first questions is, it's a half ounce per unit of seed. And I'm like, how in the world are we going to do this? But there's some technology behind this product, and there's some micronutrients behind this product. And then there's also a bacteria-based microorganism in the 401.
We went on a detour earlier when Rich was talking about seed sizes and splitting it into thirds. And so that detour is coming to an end. We're about to hop on the main road here.
Yeah. So that's
45 minutes in.
That's really why BioBoost was created. Our focus isn't trying to create a product that's got a buzz about it. It really is what have we identified? What have we identified from the years of the soil tests, the years of the tissue tests? And then as of late, BioBoost really was spearheaded by our president of research and development, Greg McClure, a farmer from southeast Illinois, who really takes a deep dive into studying plants and the architecture, corn, soybeans, whatever. And what he saw is that, you get a box of beans and it says you got 2,800 seeds per pound, right? Well, not every bean in there is 2,800 seeds per pound. You've got some that might be 2,000. You got some that might be 3,400, but the average comes back to 2,800. And so what he did was he actually went and got a gravity table and sorted them by weight, and then he planted them by their groupings by weight. And I'll never forget the first time that he told us about it. He says, I'd have been better off to take them lightweight beans and sell them to the elevator at whatever the going price was. And I'm like, come on, that's kind of far-fetched, like you paid $55 for a bushel of them and you're going to sell them for 11. And then he started to present the data and what he saw from the heavier beans and the middle beans and the light beans. And the light beans were the worst beans out of that same exact lot number every time.
And he's not just done this once. He's replicated this.
This isn't done just once, and it's not done just on his farm. He's asked other growers around his area to do the same thing and to see if they could replicate it. And what really came about that is the creation of BioBoost, is trying to level the playing field. Because reality of it is we're not going to take $55 beans and sell them to the elevator for 11, right? We're not going to. The bottom third, we're not selling them there. So how do we level up what we've already paid for? And what it came down to is what he realized was the energy in that big seed was significantly greater than what it was in the light seed, which is why a lot of times you get plant-to-plant variation, right? Technology on these planters today, the ability to control downforce on a row by row and to be able to maintain, so many pounds of margin, right? Like we've spent so many dollars on our planters, but yet you still could see row to row or plant to plant variation. And a lot of that came back to seed quality and the size of it. And so, the approach with BioBoost wasn't to try to get something to just rocket out of the ground and to get taller and to give you that sex appeal that we talked about earlier. But it was, how do we influence the seed? How do we level up and how do we influence that plant early on? Because that is ultimately the greatest chance for an impact, for setting the structure and setting the stage that Devin's talked about. And if you can do it, then you set the stage for the season. And so how do we get the benefits? We know that there are advantages to planting in March, but we also know we're not going to plant our entire crop in March, right? So what things can we do that address that? What things can we do to level up the seed-to-seed variation? And there was a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and a lot of research that went into the creation of BioBoost.
It's about 6 years, correct?
Yeah, I would say that Greg probably had about that much time spent into it, yes.
So this isn't just cookie cutter off the shelf. We're going to throw these ingredients in.
No way.
We're just going to bring it to market to try to capture market share.
Nothing that you have seen from BW Fusion has been that way. Whether it's Full Sun, whether it's Amino, whether it's SoyWorks, Cornworks, whatever the product is, especially I will say whatever you've seen in 2021-22 when HumaCal was launched, right? That first launch year was HumaCal, it was SoyWorks, and then it was Cornworks, and you got BioCast Max, and you got these things. And really what it was us understanding what the largest problems that existed from the soil data, from Agronomy 365. Devin probably has as much firsthand experience as anybody in our organization at that, because when Devin came here, he was 365. We had growers that wanted to utilize 365, but there wasn't enough of us. Early on, it was just Sean and I covering the entire country from the agronomy side of things, and it was divide and conquer. And so Travis goes out, and Travis is like, man, 365 is such a tool to bring validation to what we do, to bring transparency to growers with what your pain points are, what you're struggling with that you didn't know you were struggling with, but we don't have the ability to service it. And so Devin's, what are you, junior in college at this point?
Yeah, I think I was. It was right before my junior year at Purdue.
Yeah, so here he is. He's a junior in college, and we basically give him, here's the keys. Here's what you're going to do, and it was everywhere. He was traveling everywhere. He was collecting data. He was sitting down with growers, going over the 365 data. Here's what it is. Here's what it's telling you, right? And so what we were doing on the backside from a product development side of things is we were taking those trials that we were putting our products to the test. We were putting other things to the test, and we're saying, okay, this is the gap. This is what continues to show up. We're struggling with this. We're struggling with this. We're struggling with this. There is nothing that is just a throw it up at the board and see if it sticks from a product development side of things.
Well, to your point, last week we were at Commodity, and Sean talked about it. He did a fabulous presentation to kind of kick off Commodity Classic, and he said a product is just a product unless it brings a solution to your farm. I think Rich would agree. We've had some struggles at times, right, of Rich, not struggling a little bit of, hey, how do I get these products onto a farm, right? How do I do this? Because it's a different sale than anything else that you've ever sold, I would say. From the standpoint of it's technical, and it's technical because these products were developed to fix a problem, right? They weren't developed to go sell a product, have a bunch of flashy marketing behind, and do these other things.
I have been open about this, and I don't know, you guys have always been nice to my face about it, and we've laughed. But I'm sure that there's been some closed doors office meetings where that Rich Mort, that no good SOB. But I've pushed back on you guys, and I've pushed back really hard. And the thing that I appreciate about working with BW Fusion and selling the products is you continue to make me think. But you guys get really deep in the weeds, and I believe in KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And to sum this up, Jason Sly at Next Level Labs in South Dakota has built this lab that does soil tests, does tissue tests, and you guys are pulling that data that he's finding, and then you're going to your research and development team, and you're trying to build solutions to those products and bring that to the farm to address those needs. And showing farmers things that your traditional retail store or big box company has just not had that conversation. And I don't think it's a malicious they don't have that conversation. It's just some of the stuff that is in the marketplace and has been in the marketplace for a very, very long time is stagnant. It's the same thing over and over again, repeating the definition of insanity.
You don't know what you don't know. It doesn't 100%. Make you wrong or ignorant. You just don't know.
100%.
My frustration is once you start to get exposed to it and then you decide to do nothing, that's where I have a frustration level. But that's a question that's been asked of me, oh gosh, for the past 5 years, is do you get frustrated when you go to these different parts of the country and you speak and it's the first time that somebody's heard it? And I said, no, I don't. My frustration lies at universities, right? It lies in people that are far, far more intelligent than I am, right? But they refuse to accept anything else as truth until here lately, right? Jason and I, we joke, 5 years ago, we said if we do what we do correctly, universities will not be able to ignore it. And what are you seeing? The past couple of years, they've started to do research. I'll cite Illinois' most recent one. They did an N15 radioactive isotope study, and they found that 22% of the N that we apply actually is taken up by the plant, meaning that 78% comes from somewhere, right? Comes from the atmosphere, comes from the soil beyond what was applied, right? You're starting to see, in my opinion, you're starting to see a shift of... And
we're seeing the same thing in phosphorus.
Correct. Same studies.
We spend $100 on a MAP DAP application, throw some 1034O in there, and we really get about 30 cents of every dollar that we get back on phosphorus.
Maybe 30, right? Maybe 30. Yeah, it's fascinating. I was with a guy yesterday in Iowa, and he says to me, he says, you guys all talk about 15 cents back on the dollar, right? He said, but eventually I'm going to get that dollar back. And I said, yeah, but I said, don't you apply fertilizer every year, every 2 years? He said, yeah. I said, so you continue to put a dollar on top of the dollar that you even got the first dollar back from. And he's like, oh, I never really thought about it like that, right? And so when you think about what we're doing, you think about what BW is built on, whether it's the product is the solution, because we've done the homework to understand what they are supposed to do, whether it's a biological, whether it's a foliar, whether it's amino acid product, whatever it is. One thing that here lately I've started to tell people is you don't need a soil test to use our stuff. You need a soil test from 365 to prove to you how valuable or how significant the change that we're making on your operation is.
And that's the thing that has been that there's been times where, I've been frustrated, with things and we've changed products and we've done things and I've voiced that frustration. And the thing that I continue to go back to, you guys are the only company I know that is out there trying to prove out and be open dialogue how you're trying to prove it out with the products that you're bringing to market. And, the change is frustrating at times, but the easy button is that I'm gonna buy 401, I'm gonna put it in furrow, and I'm gonna do that year over year over year over year over year. But if that's not the best practice that I need to be implementing on my farm, and your guys' research in your lab, Jason's lab in South Dakota is telling us that, you can't ignore it. Brandon and I went down and we did a talk at a Eric Moore, Circle M Farms, and I opened the conversation and I said, I am not an agronomist. I am not a certified crop advisor. I was a shitty high school student, and I'm a college dropout. And I wanted to be transparent with those people in the room that if you were sitting there and you took the time to listen to me talk, I want to tell you who I am. And the transparency that comes with that, and you guys have shelved some products that or maybe kind of put on the back burner and brought something new that you thought did better, but you got to tie it back to that ability to take that to the lab and see. I get really frustrated when people say that this worked really, really well in Arkansas and Mississippi. I'm not in Arkansas and Mississippi. This worked really well in South Dakota. I don't farm in South Dakota, but that lab is a playing field for how a crop reacts. Whether we take it in a tissue sample and how that tissue and how that crop is performing, you can kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can kind of take that knowledge and apply to any acre in any part of the country.
When I signed up for this and going into my junior year of Purdue, I knew kind of what had been going on in the background, but I really wasn't, totally sure what all it was. I didn't realize I'd been signed up to support a platform designed to prove everything that the farmer was sold, basically to prove it wrong, right? It's the only platform I know of, only company I know of that goes to their customers and says, here's a platform, go prove me wrong that our products don't work, right? Prove me wrong, prove me right, either way. But here's a tool to truly check me. And in the biological space, it's unheard of. And like I said, last week we were at Commodity Classic, and the buzz around 365, kind of the buzz around BW, took me back a little bit, right? My dad started here in 2015. Makes you a little bit emotional because you watch how this thing has grown and how it's gone. And you see that people, they're not just interested in BW Fusion, but they're truly drawn to what we do, because it's not a, hey, Rich, go apply these 5 products, you'll get 15 bushel, see you next year, we'll come back and collect your order. It's a consultative sale, which makes it difficult. But at the same point in time, it's not just slinging product out the back door, loading semis and going. It's understanding what's going on Bodie's farm, right? What's Bodie actually need from BW? Where does that lie? Sometimes it's in products. Sometimes it's simply in 365 because there's something that he's not doing. Sometimes it's not in 365. It's easily diagnosable. It's residue management. Or, in the case of BioBoost, right, it's, hey, I have all this variation in plants and stem diameter and these other things. How can I, level out those stem diameters? How can I have more consistent germ? How can I have these more consistent things that we can come into play? But to be able to see, feel, and have growers understand, hey, you have a tool to check us. And any given point in time, you can walk away. You have that data right in your hand. But it's such a powerful thing because it shows them, hey, I might not have saw 10 bushel out of BioBoost, but look what it did to my soil, right? And these things are things that are going to compound on top of each other. And in 2026, we might see it. In 2027, we just launched a podcast on Cropcast with the CEO of Uncommon Farms. He said 1% better every day. And I think everybody should live by it. But that's truly what we're trying to do with our products. Make your soil 1% better every single day.
And people don't. You guys have touched on this, but soil is. I'm gonna shift gears here a minute. And I'll come back to it. But your dad started in 15. I met your dad through Ron Meyer in 18. Yeah, 18. I think you stepped on my farm the first time, Bodie. And for you guys that don't know Bodie, he's about 6'4". And he has a knack of sarcasm and getting under your skin.
First off, I feel like this is gonna be a shot at me. So I'm 6'7". Okay. Let the record be that. Now go ahead and take your shot at me.
Sure, small man syndrome. But I did not ever imagine that first interaction of where I'd go with BW Fusion and the things that I've learned and how it's expanded my knowledge for my farm. And when you implement this year over year, and we talk about, everyone sells chemistry side of the soil, but we've got the biology side of the soil, and we've got the
physical side.
Thank you.
Yep.
The physical side of the soil. And when we focus on those things and we improve those things, and I think touching back to what you're saying, we did this in 2025, but we saw the improvement in 26 and 27 and so on and so forth. But when you really start focusing and improving all three facets of your soil, I've seen it on our farm, things start cranking. And it's not, whether it's lower nitrogen use in corn, or if it's the way that your soil will hold water and your health, and you go back in there and we talk about, guys no-till talk about earthworms and some of that stuff, and you go out and we introduced wheat into my rotation because of trying to help build carbon, and you just start seeing these changes. It's not instant, it's not overnight, but it starts going the right direction.
Yeah, I think, one thing, I'll kind of share some real world data. And people, like, full disclaimer, I think there's everybody on the agronomy team. Devin would be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think everybody in the agronomy team is going to tell you agronomically how to influence your crops or your soils in the most agronomically efficient ways first, right? Products are going to be second. I can't tell you how many conversations I've done that when we talk about, like, and this is a problem across the entire United States. When I say this, we are carbon deficit in our soils, and we have got to start thinking about carbon and the impact of building it today. Like, we can't wait for another 3 years, for another 4 years. Jason says this. The grower that figures out how to create more sugar per acre will always win the yield competition. The grower that figures out how to build the WEOC while doing that will always do it cheaper. When you build the carbon contents of your soils, your mineralization rate is exponentially higher. How do I know that? This year, I had 239 bushel corn, fourth year corn on corn. I had 152 pounds of N applied, right? A 0.6 NUE on fourth year corn on corn. Where typically, everybody says if you're going to raise corn on corn, it's 40 more pounds that you need corn on corn than you do on soybeans. How was I able to do that? I was able to do that because I've paid attention for the last 4 years, specifically to carbon levels in my soils, taking steps to build that. And the first thing that I tell people when they ask, like, what can I do to build my WEOC levels? I say plant wheat. You want to guess how that goes over in Iowa, in Illinois, in Nebraska, even parts of northern Indiana? They're like, no, thank you, next option. So when you think about that, right? Like you think about that. Yeah, do we have products, BioCast Max, Meltdown, that have shown to increase the WEOC levels? Yes, but I promise you that we're having a conversation before we get to products about what else you can do. Nitrogen management, right? Healthy plants. A healthy plant releases 4x the amount of carbon per day than an unhealthy plant.
We are so far off the rails of
no,
what
we're not. No, we're not. So hold on. I thought about this. I've kept track of this. So since this started, you're at 20 minutes. You have 20 minutes or 25 minutes or however long this goes of what I think is probably the most raw and real, talking about who BW is in 365 and modern ag and why you did it, that you absolutely have to figure out how to keep this. And even if that's the only part, or this is the only part that you launch of that podcast instead of early planting soybeans, like,
I know how to read that board.
Yeah, I know how to read that board.
You know more than I do.
So I say all of that to say is like that right there, that last 25 minutes, that's who modern ag is. That's why modern ag is here. That's why you just told your story as to why you've done what you've done and why you partnered with BW and how we're different. So you got to figure out how to put it somewhere.
Yeah. Dakota will be all over that. I'm sure of it. But
too, I think it goes to the concept of Bodie's just talking about, right? What is the yield potential in the, we were talking about soybeans earlier. What's the yield potential in a bag of soybeans? We don't know. But every time you hear somebody, talk about, oh, hey, use this product to add bushels. When we plant that seed, we're trying to conserve as many bushels. The potential's there, right? The potential's when we get the bag. Every single stress event that we have after that is taken away, our yield potential. So we're just trying to conserve yield at that point. But to Bodie's point, when we have a healthy crop, when we have a healthy soil and all these different things, now we can mineralize. Now our soil can do things to where we don't have to sit there and micromanage it, or we don't have to farm our soil. Our soil is farming for us, and in doing that is when you see these yield increases. We can have products all day long, but if you're overapplying nitrogen, by 30, 40, 50 units, whatever we just sold you is completely null, right? It's a totally off-topic conversation.
Why? Because I'm going to dumb this down, but you're saying if we overapply nitrogen in a corn crop, we're going to burn up carbon in our soil because that nitrogen went unused, essentially.
Yep, back to that, our C to N ratio talk, right? If it's five units of N for a bushel of soybeans, it's it's 5 to 1, carbon and nitrogen. So if you have 1 unit of soybeans, you have 5 units of nitrogen, you have 25 units of carbon. So every excess pound or unit of N that we don't use is burning that hard-earned carbon. Bodie just said he spent 4 years paying attention, understanding what his WEOC's doing, understanding what's going on within his soil to maximize it on year 4. And you could argue he probably hasn't even maximized it yet, even to this point, right? He's still working towards that. But it's understanding that we're not adding bushels, right? We're conserving the potential that crop has.
We burn up 100%, but when we overapply nitrogen, we burn up carbon. That's a big takeaway from this, especially guys that are trying to make high bushel soybean yields. The second part of this is especially in the economic environment that we're in, most farms, their second largest input for a corn crop is going to be nitrogen. So if we can figure out how to use less, be more conservative, be more profitable, and not sacrifice yield because of it, and maintain that yield that we're after, why isn't more people doing this? Why are people still out there doing, my yield goal is 240 bushel corn, I'm going to put on 250 pounds in?
Before we get to there, can you clarify, you touched on it, but I don't know if a whole lot of people actually know. You said if you overapply your N, you ding your high-yielding soybeans. Why is that? Because
we're going back to that carbon piece that we talked about early on in soybeans is that is crucial. because of the carbon nitrogen ratio in that soybean and in our soil. And when we over apply that nitrogen, we burn it up. We're affecting that soybean crop that coming year. We're affecting our WEOC score.
Correct. Yeah, it's just a simple math equation. Bacteria is a 5-to-1 C to N ratio. So every pound of N you have left over or unused in that soil, multiply it by 5, and that's your carbon burnout, right? One thing that I say is that your soil pays the penalty whether you credit the nitrogen or not, right? And everybody will credit nitrogen that they write a check for. But manure, whether it's dairy, hog, chicken, whatever it is, most people don't credit hardly any of the N in there, right? And the reason is it's in the organic form. It has to be broken down. It has to be converted to inorganic chemistry to be able to be taken up. But I share this guy out of Nebraska. He says, hey, what else would you do? 280 bushel yield goal under a pivot. How much nitrogen do I need to put on? I said, well, what'd you put on? He said, I put 30 ton of cattle manure on, right? And that's a standard application out there in Nebraska. And I said, good Lord. I said, how many pounds of N are you applying? He said, that's only 150 pounds of N. I said, send me the analysis. He said, it's 5 pounds per ton. I said, no. I guarantee you're only looking at the available right now, first year availability. I said, send me the analysis. It's 30 pounds of N per ton. 30 times 30 is 900. He was applying 900 pounds of N, and the question was how much more should I put on, right? And it is something that I've seen all over the place, right? And so the question doesn't become is how much more. It's like, holy cow, we got to stop. Like, we got to go to 5 ton. We got to go to 8 ton. And then we got to react the N that's in there, because you see your soil test fertility levels continue to climb behind manure applications, but your yields don't go. The first year you put manure on the ground, 15 bushel. That's usually what it's worth, 10 to 15 bushel. Put manure on ground today, never had it before. But as farmers, we have two reactions, right? We see 15 bushels from manure. The first reaction is if some is good, more is better. And the second reaction is more often, right? And what we see carbon burnout. We see those CSAT levels go down. And as CSAT levels go down, the check you have to write for synthetic nutrients goes up, right? And so by and large, we've created our soils to be chemically driven. And somebody sometime raised 240 bushel corn on 250 pounds of N, and that's what they think it takes, right? They don't know any different. They think that it takes that amount of N. I'd
like to read a quote that kind of sums up what we're doing. Nutrients are only important for a function. It's never been about the pounds of nutrients in the soil. It's always been about maximizing the plant's ability to get the nutrients it needs when it needs them. The excess of pounds that we have been taught to think were needed was only to compensate for the lack of knowledge in maximizing the plant's function of uptake and reallocation. And I think that perfectly sums up exactly, what you guys are talking about. It's, hey, if we wanted 240 bushel corn, we put on 230 units of N, our yield went up. Well, by golly, when we go to 240 or 250, oh, hey, it went up. And it's funny because when guys say, hey, when I put on more nitrogen, my corn yields went up, and at the same exact point in time, their soybean yields stayed the same or went down. I mean, it is like the exact same track, but it's exactly this, right? It's the excess pounds, or just to compensate for not fully understanding what's actually happening with those excess pounds.
And again, you could just get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into this, and it really does become overwhelming at times. That university standard that we've all been taught from our retailers, or so even some independent agronomists out there that were educated at the universities, but as you start to look at this differently, there was I can't remember who said it, but a 10% increase in yield equates to a 50% increase in profit. And we look at crop insurance schedules and the rate that you've got coverage on, and some guys, and I'm this really agitates me. We spend our entire crop budget. Some guys will spend their entire fertility crop budget before the seed's ever in the ground. or right at the seed being in the ground. And then they come back and they address, a fungicide for the disease pressure. But when we can tie that crop insurance, into our bottom line and our budget, and we know what we're doing, and we can manage that crop throughout the growing season. And I've done this, and I've been agitated by it. I did not want to have. I don't want to live in a sprayer all year long. I don't want to make multiple trips. But some of the things that we can address going throughout the growing season and maybe reallocate some of those dollars and become more profitable by doing it. This is also tying back to the 365, what products we should be using, what amounts we should be using, when ideal time to apply those things are. And for the guy that just wants to go through the motions, this is probably overwhelming and frustrating. But the guy that it has been searching for hitting that next gear, hitting that next level, I don't know of anywhere else to turn besides this thought process.
So a couple of things. I don't think anybody ever says, I don't want to do better, right? But you think about from a farm, right? And I'll kind of put it back to you guys. What are you going to be really good at, right? You're going to excel at something on your operation. And I've seen it, let's say it's brothers, right? One brother is an excellent grain marketer. The other's a great mechanic, right? But very rarely are they the same person.
Sure.
Right? You have to be an accountant. You've got to be a mechanic. You've got to be a grain marketer. You've got to be an agronomist. Well, which one of those are going to fall off, right? And so I think it's so overwhelming because, we've just accepted for the past 50 years, like, hey, it's an equation, right? Put 100 pounds of map on or 200 pounds of map on if we want to build, 100 pounds if we want to maintain, yada, 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 move on down the road, right? And it's easy, and it has worked to this point, right? But from my perspective of running a farm and running the business side of it is I just got so frustrated watching margins just continue to decompress. I mean, time and time again, like it just got smaller and smaller and smaller. And our farm was that. Our farm is that our budget was shot between NP and K. The conversation about having micros or anything like that, don't even talk about it because we spent all of our fertility dollars already on NPK. There was nothing left, right? And so to your point, you made a couple points I want to make sure that we address. You don't want to live in a sprayer all season long to deliver nutrients. Yet we know that the majority of the nutrients are taken up on the back half of the growing season, right?
Yep.
And I would say that nobody wants to live in a sprayer. So what can you do? You think about it, and that's the role of biology. Biology asks itself two questions. Do I like my environment, number one? Number two, is there food available? If the answer is yes to both of those, then they're going to perform their functions, right? And their functions are growing their numbers and excreting enzymes. Those enzymes facilitate nutrient availability season long. So how do you guarantee or how do you take steps to make nutrients available 10 months after you apply them in the fall? And I know people look at me as like, you're crazy for looking at biology. I look at everybody else and say, you're freaking crazy. You put your nutrients on 10 months before your plant needs them. We know that the majority of the nutrients are needed late season, and you're not doing anything to try to drive that nutrient availability late season.
In exchange for that biology working in that soil and creating that enzyme and making nutritional available to the plant, and we talk about this from a sugar standpoint, that plant's creating a sugar and plant exudates, feeding that microbe, and that's that circle. That's that exchange. That's season long building.
Yep.
Those things, those naturally occur in our soil, but there's some things that we can add from a biology standpoint and a food to get those things working faster, and spread out different types of. And what I mean by this, in 401, is there 34 different?
32.
32? 32 different microorganisms in that 401 by itself. And I again, we can jump in this and talk for probably 2 more hours, but the 501 with the fungi piece in it and introducing that stuff. And, guys talk about it from, your dad tells this story about how he went around selling 501 meltdown to digest stocks to save guys on tires. And tire stubble rot is a real issue, but I'd rather replace the tires and get that plant broke down and cycling nutrients back into that soil to help that exchange start happening again. To me, that's the benefit. It's not, I'll buy the rubber.
I'm sure you would.
I think you're 100%. I think you're 1,000% right on it. Right? It's not necessarily saving rubber on tires. There's value in that, right? But the real value is getting that valuable nutrition, getting that valuable carbon back into your soil, and also understanding the food sources that we're putting with it. Right? When we look at a product like BioBoost and the food source that we have in there is such a high quality food source that the beneficial microbes really like, right? It's the same thing as human diets, right? Carnivores, they eat meat, they eat high protein, they eat that kind of stuff, right? Your most productive biology, or a lot of your best biology, the ones that you really want, that's the diet they want, right? They want to power through that day. They want to do everything that they possibly can to then get that sugar from that plant that night, right? They want to make sure that mutually beneficial relationship occurs. And so they want the best food source possible to power them, to give them that energy to then be able to trade those sugars. Plant trades sugar, microbe trades enzyme. Boom, you have a trade. They bartered. Both parties are happy. Now both go back to work because that plant wants what that microbe has, and that microbe dang sure wants what the plant has.
And when we accomplish that in our growing season, later in the growing season, and that suck of nutrients when corn and soybeans are in the reproductive stage, and that's essentially plant health and stress mitigation. And the healthier that we can keep a plant, the longer we can keep it alive, the longer we can keep it working and having that exchange happen, the more we're going to drive yield, essentially.
But I think that starts at the beginning and not midway through throwing up a Hail Mary pass and trying to hope for the best.
Well, one of you guys have said that in the past, is that you don't start raising a big crop in the middle of the growing season. It started at the planter.
You got to have everything right. I mean, last year, and you get a call every year, a couple calls, the guy's like, "Hey, come check out my beans. I think I have 100 bushel beans." You walk in the field and you're like, they're just not there, right? They don't.
You hate to break their heart, don't you?
I've had to let Rich down easy a couple times.
Your dad and I joke that every August I call him and I say I'm going to pull my bush hog out and I'm just going to bush hog them because they're not worth cutting.
And then Travis asks you to just give them to him and he'll take them off your hands.
Yeah, and we've never made that exchange. So it's that frustrating piece on a soybean, and we were down in Sarasota, and Creed Gunn and I talked about this a lot, and we talked about it privately the other day on a telephone call. It is we don't have water where we're at. We can't turn a pivot on, but trying to figure out these things, that why these beans just give up that yield. And I think that's the first time I've ever heard anyone say that a bean's just automatically going to abort 60 to 70% of its blooms. That's the frustrating piece to me. We keep trying to figure this out. We keep trying to do things, but when water shuts off late season and we start to go the other way on that crop, it just continues to we leave yield on the table. I'm getting I just got a phone showed to me that we have now been at this for an hour and a half. So
the good thing is you're not going to make anybody suffer through the entire thing. You're going to cut this into a lot of different episodes.
Bodie
but
and I,
to one point before we go, what you said. How long ago was it that we did the road show? Not the most recent one. The first one. Was it 2 years ago?
2 years ago, yep.
Yeah, we did a road show, and we were in Nebraska, right? And I stood up on stage, and I asked people, I said, how many people want to raise 100 bushel beans? Everybody's hand goes up. I said, how many people have raised 100 bushel beans? Just a few hands go up. I said, how many people think that it's the August rains that make 100 bushel beans? Everybody's hands goes back up. I said, now how many of you guys have pivots? And everybody's hands went up. And then they said, whoops. And what we know is there's some validity to that, right? I'm not telling you that there's not. But I will tell you that the carbon is the ultimate trump card. Is you can have rain, you can have pivots, and not have carbon, and you'll have average beans. You can have carbon and not have rain or water, and you can have really good beans, right? So, yes, we know we need water because water facilitates a nutrient availability and a nutrient cycling mineralization. But I'll still say this. We said this at the beginning of version 1. Now I call this version 2. But at the beginning of version 1, carbon is we've got to start paying attention to it. We have got to start farming carbon. And I don't care about no freaking pipelines. I don't care about no $10 carbon credits. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is we have got to start taking the steps today to farm in a more carbon efficient manner. We got to ask ourselves, what can we do to build it? What can we do to maintain it? And what can we do to prevent the loss of it? Those three things. And I think that right there is another podcast in and of itself answering those three questions. How do I build it? How do I maintain it? And how do I prevent the loss of it?
See, I will not take any more of your guys' time because I know you got a decent drive home. But I wanted to point this out. Bodie Kitchel gives you great information and makes your thought process. And Bodie and I have names that we call each other. Bodie he calls me William, which is my dad's name, and I call him something that I can't say on this.
Is it the FCC? Is that what they banned this thing so fast?
I don't know. I bleep it. Something I don't know.
Yeah, that's one of the words you can't say.
I can't say. But you know, he kind of gets this sense that, or I get the sense that he kind of talks down to me a little bit and makes me feel dumb, and it hurts my feelings.
You're 5'10", so I do talk down to you.
I see what I'm saying. The other thing is that we put you in a nice chair, and then housekeeping orders, you flip over your big gulp on
I got
the
a
floor.
lid. I got a lid. It's safe.
Guys, thank you so much. I don't know how we're going to dissect this and how much this is going to be broke into from that standpoint, but Bodie, Devin, thank you. Belushi.
Yeah, I think we covered a whole lot of stuff and got in depth real. But as a producer and a grower, I think growing 50 to 60 bushel beans is pretty easy. But if you're a grower and you want to go to 70, 80 bushel beans, I think you need to look into what we've talked about and take the dive, and because there's a lot of information. Try
20 acres. Try 10 acres. Try 5 acres. Just try it and see what it does. And I don't think you'll regret doing it.
Be a student of your crop. I think it's the most important thing. Every year, our neighbors think we're absolute lunatics where I live, because every year they can guarantee Baker Farms is going to be doing something different. This year, probably planting a couple acres of beans here. I don't even know what the date is. Did you say March 12th?
March 12th.
Tomorrow, Devin. Tomorrow's a good day to plant beans.
March 13th, plant some beans, but it's just to learn, right? It's to understand. It's to continue to evaluate, continue to evolve. I was disappointed we didn't get any in February. I really just wanted to go plant an acre just to see, right? March beans, I think, work in a lot of environments and could work and need to be tested in every one to make sure. But it's just taking the next step, just learning. It's understanding. It's, I enjoy nothing more than the summertime, getting home from work, doing my day job, which happens to be looking at crops, and then being really disappointed and going looking at my own, but truly understanding and learning what's going on with that crop, right? What are some things that we can learn the good, the bad, and the ugly, because that's how you grow. That's how you get better, and that's what makes farming fun, in my opinion. Is just learning, growing, trying new things. Some things don't work, and I think it's completely okay to fail. Unfortunately, in farming, you fail in the public eye because your neighbors drive past it every day and all of that. But the biggest steps you're going to take on your farm is trying something new, being a student of your crop, and not being afraid to have that acre or two of crops that you're like, not my proudest moment, but we learned something, and that's what I care about.
Well, the easiest thing that farmers do and what they rely on is Daddy did it this way and Granddaddy did it this way, and trying to step outside of your box and look at something from a different lens is a tough thing to do. But do it in baby steps.
Yeah.
So, try 5 acres,
and
try 10.
And I think if you want to, really get them neighbors to talk, you should do it in a leprechaun outfit, since it's close to,
St. Patty's Day.
St. Patty's Day, and if it works and it's awesome and your results are great, you can say it's the luck of the Irish.
When I planted beans in March the first time, I had a neighbor openly say that I just got lucky, and I'm not going to lie, I was a little pissed off the second time I did it, and I just wanted to prove him wrong that I could do it again. So there's a little there's ego can lead to drive. We're going to have Devin and Bodie back probably a couple more times this year, and they'll probably put a time limit on it. But I think it's good information, and I hope you guys enjoy. Thank